what we saw was last year, maybe started off from January to December. From the first year of January to the last year of December. We got a lot to be thankful for. We accomplished a lot of things. We still have a lot to do. We still a lot of things doing and there out in this country as well, in the whole world. So we are still in control of God. We thank Him for everyone here, on the jurors, on the colleagues, on the jury, everyone that works with us. We really are blessed them tremendously. And so we say, we got along in this country, on this world. We got someone that leads all of us. So it's all we do is human beings to do the right thing. There's a jury, so we have to be a voice for the voice. We got to help people, not to hurt people. I want the public to understand that. So we try to make decisions that people don't like. And most of the time, they put their own government. I'm just there for prayer. And that's what God will do. You can't remember the style because a lot of bad things happen in the world. You affected that 18-year-old female kid. She got kind of bust out the morning. A lot of things came from the Lord. We need to pray for one another and pray for our country. We need to. And love is the thing that's thrown up for one another. We have to learn to love each other. That's how to get along. The only time we see this country come together was crazy. We come together, and once that's over, we go to our way. We got to learn to be on one accord. I think I'm on the side of everything. Father, we come to for this day. Thank you, all the blessings we have realize without you, we couldn't have accomplished it. We call for this one. I thank you for your son, Jesus. We don't think possible. I pray for you to everyone come up with that. That we go from January to December. Let's look at this. We know we couldn't have done it without you. I pray for the country. I pray for state, heritage, community. I pray for the family. I pray for the young. I pray for the youth. I pray for everyone else. Just look at my brother. I pray for all of them. You don't want to call them. We're into the new year with a new beginning. That's what we're doing. And thank you for the things we have done in the past. We're not couldn't done it without you. I thank you for help. I thank you for strength. And thank you for your God. Your life. Everything is said is done here. To be mine. You are all the praise. In Jesus' name, I pray. Amen.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, God.
Mr. Dexter Armstead. Mrs. Kristen Chastain.
Here.
Mr. Michael Cheatham.
Here.
Mr. Kyle Flanagan.
Here.
Mr. Jason McCray.
Present.
Mr. Keith Mills.
Here.
Mr. Richard Oliver.
Here.
Dr. Chrissy O'Quinn.
Here.
President Louis Kent.
What's the food agenda for?
I'll second.
What's going on? You know what I'm saying? Okay, first item is the movement of resolution reestablish a polling location of precinct 14C in Magnolia Fire Department. State your name, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, member of the jury, Mike Kessner with Geographic Planning, Demographic Services. Just right, I guess, around the time of Thanksgiving, Ms. Harris got in touch with me to try to help resolve an issue that came up between the Secretary of State and the parish regarding the polling location for precinct 14C, which is out on the east end of the parish. When the parish completed and submitted the precinct surveys that were done earlier this year, they indicated they want to move the polling location from 14C from Magnolia Fire Department to Bluff Creek. When I was asked to look into that, I found that the travel distance was more than 10 miles, which is the maximum allowed by state statute. So My recommendation was to go ahead and keep it back at either 14C or put it at the maintenance department here in Clinton. In talking with Ms. Harris, the registrar, Secretary of State's office and whatnot, it looks like it's best to keep it right now at Magnolia Fire Department. That's where it's been. Precinct 14 is also voting at that, so that qualifies as a consolidated polling location. One polling location serving more than one precinct. That meets the exemption for the parish not having to pay for precincts that have under 300 active voters. If it was a single precinct polling at one location by itself, you would be responsible for that cost unless you merge. But it's a consolidated one, it meets that exemption. The problem is that when the Secretary of State's office got the precinct surveys, they saw that it was being moved to Bluff Creek. What we need to do is have you adopt a resolution, move it back to Magnolia Fire Department. That's all that this does, is just undoes what the precinct surveys did earlier this year. So it's pretty straightforward. I tried to draft it so it was self-explanatory. But I do want to mention though that there's really, and it may be something we may want to look at doing, the jury may want to do this coming year, is to merge 14C and precinct 14 into one precinct. There's really no reason to have two separate precincts polling at the same location. You can have one precinct between both those polling at that location. That's just going to make your precincts run a little bit more efficiently and make better use of your taxpayer money when it comes time for elections as well as the state. But we can tackle that next year.
We can make either people go that far.
Yeah, and my understanding, talking with the registrar, most of the voters live right there in the vicinity of Magnolia Fire Department. So that's going to be a whole lot better. I think if it was kept at Bluff Creek, that we probably are going to have some problems, justifiably so. But I understand that part of the problem had been they were trying to relieve some of the number of people that were over at the Magnolia Fire Station, because I understand it's not really a very large facility. So I understand the intent. It's just that I think probably when you look at the big scope of things, it's probably better just go ahead and keep it there. So that's what this resolution does.
So what's the treasure is, and this chapter is that
Yeah. I make that motion.
Second. Second by Mr. Armstead. Any discussion? Any question from the audience? None? Yes, sir. Come to the mic, please.
Darrell Mueller, Assistant Fire Chief with Bluff Creek Fire Department. We have a couple of issues. Now, not really with that one, with Olive Branch while we're talking. The problem we got, we pay for all the heat to go in there. We run the heaters wide open. And Chrissy knows, hey, we had that the other day. We had it wide open for 2 days. We used propane bottles, big 40-pound bottles, because we have to bring our trucks out. If it's below freezing, we're not moving our trucks out. Because who's gonna pay for a new pump to be put in if it cracks it? Our trucks have to stay into a side of heated bay. So while we're discussing this, we probably need to look at that, because there's no more land right there at Olive Branch to put a motor precinct unless we get property beside us. And our fire department is paying dear. We run them heaters, we had them on for 2 solid days, trying to warm it up, because one lady in there complaining about she's cold.
But it was cold in there. I always early vote, you vote out there too.
It's a bay.
It's just a giant, big building with no insulation,
Yeah.
no anything, and I know it's not often that cold, but it was really too cold for people to come in there and sit there all day or to vote.
And the heaters we have in there are designed to keep the building above freezing.
We don't have very many water elections. We have very many elections, period. It's not like we have elections every month.
But if it's one, that's the problem we run into. I mean, a new pump right now is $25,000 to $30,000 to put one in the truck if it busts.
It's not on the agenda. We can take a rest on
Yeah.
that this moment.
But that's why I wanted to bring it up while we was discussing that. I know Magnolia's a little bit smaller, but we had 2 precincts in there before. So that wouldn't be an issue there. Because we're getting ready to remodel it out of our budget, for the election folks and all on there.
Some of the registrars, or whatever you call them out there, even brought their own heaters, which one of them.
One of them caught on fire, we didn't know about it either. That he brought her own personal heater and it caught on fire.
Those cases are always responsibility of the other.
Yeah,
We take no consideration.
yeah.
We can't take away from it. You can't consider it. You won't consider it. So we got to work in it, all in favor? And opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, President. Good to see you all. Have some happy holidays.
Likewise, to your family. Go with the regular agenda. Adopt the minutes from December 2nd, 2024, regular meeting. No correction, motion.
Yeah, I'll make a motion.
This by Mr. Miller. Second by Coach Chief. Any discussion? Please vote order. Is that all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. New business. Discuss take action on personnel account at 697 Highway 61 Jackson. Debt vacancy, is here.
Where's Mr. Williams at? Did he leave? Jim, come on,
Take a
Jim.
ride, please.
Get this out.
That's the new business. Take your name.
Jeff Williams, gun official. I'm familiar with this piece of property, and there is an old camper that's on there already. I took the liberty and went by there to take a look at it, and it needs some extensive work on the electrical side of it, so I was hoping they were gonna be here tonight to talk about it. Mr. Oliver, did they explain to you or discuss how long they want it to be?
Nobody's ever talked, except you.
So how do you want to agenda, I guess is the question.
Well, I guess we can say.
I make a motion, we table it until they come forward, until they come out.
No, they never called me.
We're here with the.
Yeah.
Okay. Please the order. You all in favor? And opposed? It's only good. Let's take action on the adoption of 2024 budget amendment, 2025 operating budget. Paul Kalani.
Good evening, everyone. Scott Lazaro with Falcon Winkler. First off, apologies for my tardiness to the public hearing. I wrongfully assumed it started at 6 and had another meeting from 4 to 5. So I would have rearranged that if I knew it was at 5:30. So I gave an updated document to all of you, just a couple of additional summary schedules in here since the last draft you saw. As well as we had previously discussed rolling both the building code and Homeland Security departments into the general fund, since it's truly a general fund function. And in that last draft that included that, there was a formula error not bringing in the Homeland Security expenses into the total expenses of the general fund. So no changes to any of the individual line item amounts, but it does affect general fund total expenditures from the last version you saw, which unfortunately puts your general fund in a larger projected deficit for next year. So on the very first page, you have just a simple, straightforward budget message that talks about just the methodology behind it, and then behind that is a resolution you have in front of you for your adoption tonight. And then the next page behind that is the summary across all funds. So this is one of the new summary pages. Again, I got this done this afternoon. So this wasn't in the last packet, but it just has a summarized basis for across all funds which is just a summary of all of the detailed individual funds you've already seen. So you can see parish-wide between general fund, road and bridge, solid waste, health unit, pettit, jury, coroner, criminal court. Total projected revenues for 2025 just under $9 million at $8.979 million. Total expenditures right at $8.612 million. Transfers in and out between funds, obviously zero out, leaving you a projected increase in fund balance for next 2025 across all funds of just under $367,000. The other thing that happened when I quickly put this together is health unit is actually that fund balance beginning of year that you see at $810,000. It's actually projected to have typed in the wrong amount. It's going to have a beginning projected fund balance in 2025 of $3.1 million. So after that $800,000 surplus next year, projected ending fund balance in the health unit next year of $3.95 million. And as a result, across all funds, projected fund balance of $10.6 million. So overall, like from a 2025 budget standpoint, a $367,000 surplus is not a bad spot to be. And total fund balance across all funds of $10.6 million is not a bad spot to be. The problem comes in when you look at the general fund by itself. There in the far left-hand column. You can see if we just kind of keep everything status quo, and I'll go into more details on the general fund, projected deficit next year of $483,000, which would leave that general fund only with a fund balance of $300,000. Now, a couple of things that will help that is the health unit. If you recall, we've had some discussions on the way that tax proposition was written, and the fact that the health unit needs to keep 1 year of operating expenses at fund balance, and after that, the residual gets transferred between road and bridge and general fund. Last two propositions have had 90% to road and bridge, 10% to general fund. I have not done anything with that in this budget as of now. Here's why. Number one, there was a previous Attorney General opinion specific to you all exactly on this exact matter that stated you needed to go back 3 years and do true-ups. For the last 2 or 3 years, the health unit has been transferring money to the coroner fund. That is not allowable use of health unit funds. So as a result, it's not as simple as taking the excess fund balance and giving 10% to road and bridge and 10% to general fund, 90% to road and bridge, because we have to go backwards 3 years and basically unwind it and recalc who is due what over a 3-year cumulative amount. Now, at the end of the day, the good news is health unit, if you look at its total expenditures budgeted for next year, $350,000. So if it's got a projected fund balance of 3.9, what I'm telling you is you have about $3.5 million that can go to other funds. Problem is going to be, I think, the lion's share, if not all of it, after we correct all of the previous 3 years, is going to really all be road and bridge. And there's not going to be a whole lot left, if any, to go back to your general fund. So,
how that proposition was written, a year from the point over what happened. You want to do what it does?
yeah, it is what it is. And if you look road and bridge, it's already got a pretty healthy fund balance at 2.8. Now, obviously, if you look at its annual expenditures at 2.4 million, you can spend money pretty fast there. So I'm not saying you can't use the extra $3.5 million that it's due, but the general fund could probably use it more, is what I'm saying. So keep that in mind. Again, I kind of want to, I mentioned this in my email to your internal team here when I sent them the latest draft. I'm in no way suggesting or recommending that this should be a final spending plan for 2025, and you should consciously spend $483,000 more than you bring in the general fund. I went through some various accounts, tried to sort of internally challenge some things. Why is it that amount? Can we reduce it? And what I found is you have a lot of expenses in your general fund that, quite frankly, you're not making day-to-day spending decisions over. And I'll get into those in detail whenever we look at the general fund by itself. But high level, I'm talking Homeland Security, coroner, parish prison expenses. There's a lot of DA's office funding. There's a lot of expenses like that that you're not necessarily controlling day-to-day through issuing POs and writing checks. Again, you are obligated as a general fund and as a parish to fund those expenses. The question is, what's reasonable and what can you afford? And that's where I think some conversations need to be had, as well as all of the other departments and some of the internal spending decisions. So I'm presenting this to you tonight with 2024 budget amendments because it's December 16th and all of these actuals are through October, so we know that's pretty much where you're gonna land. You've got a lot of expenses in the current year that relates to whether it be grants, other grants received in prior years, or ARPA funds received in prior years. For purposes of next year, I've tried to carve most of that out, that we can come back if you want to spend ARPA funds on a certain function, we can do a budget amendment to do that. But I carved most of it out for next year in an effort to say, what is a true picture of operating money in and operating money going out? So I'll speak to that whenever we get there. The next page is the table of contents that just basically has the page numbers for each individual fund. You can see the general fund, including the building code and homeland security, is covers the first 7 pages. Again, I want to talk high level and changes from the last draft you've seen, so I'm not going to go through every individual line item, but looking at, and again, I'll highlight any key changes between, I'm really going to be focused on your 2025 projected amounts, which is the far right-hand column, and the proposed final amounts where we're estimating we're going to finish 2024. So tax revenues in the general fund, 1.739 million. Really no change from where we're projecting you to finish in 2024. License and permits revenue, 423,000, projecting to finish this year at 413,000. Couple of things worth noting there. If you look at some of those items in licenses and permits, building permits, building contractor fees, tower inspection fees, some of that is a combination of general fund and building code amounts. Like I said, building code is really a general fund function. It's rolled in here. So all of that to say, when you look at license and permitting revenue of 423,000, remember some of that has to cover all of the expenses associated with running your building code and zoning department. Intergovernmental grant revenue, this is where you'll see some large fluctuations year over year. Estimated at 600,000 for next year. Really the only thing in here is if you look at the bottom 3 line items, the estimated homeland security grants for next year at 25, 40, and 50K. So a total of about 95,000. I'm sorry, 125,000. 25, 40, and 50. 115, thank you for the quick math. And keep that number in mind as we get to homeland security expenses. State revenue sharing, severance tax, royalties, fire insurance rebate, 130,000. You turn around and hand that over to your fire protection department. No actual money to be spent. Reimbursement from parish prison, 50,000. You're spending 5 to 550 a year, so not really a revenue that you can use to cover day-to-day expenses. Page 2, other miscellaneous. You can see about 160,000 a year, mostly related to admin fees and the merchant fees you get through the escrow fund, but again, you have a corresponding expense associated with that. All of that to say, if we look at total revenues of the general fund, 2.9 million. 2.9 million to fund any and all activities that we're going to cover on pages 3 through 7. So if you keep that in mind, and remember that some of these revenues have a direct expense correlated with them, you'll see just how tight it really is. Page 3, legislative, this is basically all of the police year, all of your salaries and the related benefits, 206,000. Decrease this past year, you see 372,000 projected this past year. That's due to the legal settlement for 165K. So taking that back down to historical amounts. Elections, registrar of voters, again, another sort of function that you're required to fund, but $200,000 a year where we're estimating. Now, the one thing, if you look back in 2023, it was 100,000. This year, we think it's going to be 112. Next year at 204, that clerk of court cost of 132. That includes one-time capital outlay expenses of almost 100K that you're funding with ARPA funds. So most of it is carved out outside of what I tell you. That was something that you all had discussed. That's not a recurring expense. So that's why it's a little bit inflated for next year. It's not 200,000 on an annual basis. It's generally more like 100. Financial and admin expenses, again, 730 and 23, projecting out at 994 this year. Some of it relates to the insurance issues we discussed. I've also built in a 20% increase across the board in all funds for just general liability, property, all non-health related insurance costs. So that's part of the reason it's up for next year. We're also reallocating salaries more how they were done prior to 2024. The allocation of salaries and forcing the general fund to bear a larger portion of salaries than they historically have is kind of why you see a reduction in total salary costs for next year. For your awareness, we did update and we do have a salary schedule with all the various positions of what funds they're being allocated to. And I can't remember if it was 2,000 more or 2,000 less, but 2025 budgeted salaries are within $2,000 total of where we're expecting to finish 2024. So you'll see a decrease in salaries here on the general fund because we're allocating more to some of the other funds for your general people who get involved with other things. So you can see financial and admin 770, which is really close to where it historically was back in 2023. Page 4, other G&A. Historically, you spent about $100,000 on building maintenance across all buildings in the parish. So that's just kind of a carryover number. You can see this year it's a little higher. I think some of that was funded by ARPA funds, but next year taking that back down to $100,000. The transfers out to the escrow fund, that's the merchant fees I mentioned earlier where you had a revenue. This is just the corresponding expense. And then you've got some other G&A, which is mostly jail nurse salaries in there, which is minimal, but $180,000 in total in other G&A. It's higher projected for 2024 because we've got some grant expenses in there, but we do have corresponding grant revenues in the current year. Public Works, this is primarily building code expenses as well as parish farm agent down there at the bottom, and then just minimal $20,000 of engineering services within the general fund. The lion's share of engineering services are budgeted in either road and bridge and or solid waste. But again, this is all of your building code salaries and benefits. And you can see approximately $270,000 a year. If you recall back to the revenue page, we had a similar number for license and permits, so they're pretty much covering themselves, but it's not any extra fund balance that you can use to fund other operations. Public safety, again, we've added Homeland Security in here. You can see the actual for 2023 is $138,000. The proposed budget for this year is $190,000, and next year's was $194,000. I actually cut some of the amounts from what was originally provided to me for next year. I think the original amount was a little bit higher than that, but just looking at where spending has historically been and what you can realistically afford to spend, I did sort of make a recommendation in here to reduce some of those costs more in line with historical amounts. Basically with the idea of we historically spent $140,000 to $170,000, why do we need to spend $210,000? Even at 193, I think that's an area you need to look at. I mean, yes, we've got $115,000 in grant revenue budgeted for that, but some of those grants aren't really funding day-to-day costs that you would already fund anyways. They have a direct expense correlated with them, so they don't really have any bottom line effect. That's an area I would really recommend, working with your Homeland Security Director, challenging some of the previous areas of spending, seeing can you create some efficiencies with maybe similar type expenses that are already happening in this office and cut that, because at the end of the day, the general fund, general tax dollars are, covering your Homeland Security function to the net of 150K a year after revenues and expenses. Again, it is a required function. You know, the parish can't say we're not funding Homeland Security. You got to do it, but the question is what's reasonable and sustainable overall.
So it's unfunded mandate, that is,
Right, and yeah, so my challenge would be rather than 193,000 a year, how can we fund it at 130 or 140 instead of 200?
So I understand, like you said, if we have to fund, but like you said, there should be a challenge in trying to get that cost down. That's just, to me, would be like straight business ethics to try to get the cost down.
Right, yeah.
Because we already know we limited in that general fund, and we're gonna be in the red.
And-
Like that.
Right, and when I say that about Homeland Security, it holds true for any and all departments within the parish. You know, some of these are just ones that I don't know all of the history behind all of them. I just know some of them, we're funding it, and we're not necessarily making every single day-to-day spending decision outside of approving a budget. Other public safety, lion's share there is parish prison expenses. You can see somewhere in the $500,000 to $550,000 ballpark a year. You did have a reimbursement on the revenue side of things for $50K, but that's still a net $500K hit on your general fund. Fire protection, $130,000. You saw the fire insurance rebate in the revenue section. Historically, you've taken that entire fire insurance rebate and you hand it over to your fire protection district. So again, not costing you money, but it's not making you money. The judicial function, this is JOPs and constables, as well as the district attorney and their secretaries, and as well as some criminal court funding. Spent $270,000 in this area in '23. This year, you budgeted $342. Spending looks like it's going to be pretty much where you budgeted, maybe about $14,000 higher. And the only changes for next year is that we did reflect the additional $50 per month per employee that was requested and I believe approved at a meeting maybe about a month ago. So $362,000 a year, not much change from the $356,000 you're projecting to spend this year, but a big expense in the overall picture.
So, so I just give some quick math, but like you said, you're going back to 2023, there's like a $94,000 increase in expenditures. I know we have to fund, but like you said, we have to, the costs keep going up. In a couple of years, we're almost at 100K.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, and again, some of it, you know, I've learned through the process, and I'm learning more. I'll continue to learn more, so we can advise you as best see fit. But you know, some of these are arrangements that have been, you know, in place forever and or mandated. So you just historically funded them. It's just you're getting to the point where you have to decide what can we afford long term. Health and welfare within the general fund is minimal, just some council on aging funding. $25,000 a year. Culture and rec, I know we had a discussion about that. You can see you only spent $6,000 in '23. You budgeted to spend $20 this year. You're not going to spend that. Likely won't even hit that $7. I've increased it a little bit to $10 for next year due to ongoing maintenance. I have put one of the other ARPA-related items in here. If you move to the top of page 7, you'll see a line item for capital outlay on the recreation side of things at $50K, with the idea that ARPA is one-time money. Maybe you can do some one-time upgrades to your parks and spend that $50 in ARPA funds, and then $10 per year to maintain it. But then, you know, it's getting its big shot in 2025 from ARPA funds. So the clerk of court one-time expenses I mentioned for $95,000, and these recreation costs of $50,000 are ARPA-related funds where you've already gotten revenue in prior years, and now you're just spending the money. Everything else I've left out, capital outlay, government buildings, all of that would qualify should you choose to allocate ARPA funds. Just put $100,000 in there with the idea that a government this size, general fund, capital outlay, equipment, etc., $100,000 is a reasonable and probably even small number on what you would spend in a year. And the big change here from what you've historically seen is the transfer out to the coroner. You can see it was 28,000 in '23. The original budget this year was 28,000. The reason it was only 28 in the past is you were using the health unit to fund that corner deficit. Now that we have that is no longer an allowable use of health unit funds, it falls on the general fund. You can see we're projecting that it needs to make a final transfer in '24 for 180,000 to keep corner break even, and with any fund balance in at the end of '24, and another 260,000 next year. And we'll see that when we get to the corner fund detail. That's the lion's share of what is funding those expenses. Road and Bridge, page 8. Can see proposed final budget for 2024 right at 3.13 million. That includes 700,000 in FEMA reimbursements. So not putting those in the budget for next year is why you see a lower revenue amount for next year. They're at 2.5 million, 2.448, so a little under 2.5 million. Going down the board, I mean, if you look at all the expenditures, they're all obvious road and bridge related expenditures. Most of these amounts are in line with historical amounts. The only place you'll see any sort of change is in 2025. If you look at salaries, retirement, and insurance, that 838 number, very much in line with where you're projecting to be in 2024, but much larger than the 2023 amount, mostly due to, again, allocation of salaries between general, health, solid waste, and road and bridge. But still in line with where you're projecting. You've got debt service in the road and bridge for equipment leases of 172,000 a year. And then capital outlay, I did 62,000. That was a truck purchase that you approved a couple of months ago, but that won't be ready in '24, so it's in the '25 budget. But still a projected surplus this year, next year, 2025, 73,000, and projected ending fund balance of 2.7. Again, going to be much larger number after that health unit fund balance issue is correct. If you're wondering why the decrease in fund balance of $3 million in 2024, essentially spending a lot of ARPA funds on road overlay projects, grant monies that were received in prior years that are just not being spent. Page 10 is solid waste. From a revenue standpoint, really ratcheting back down the 2023 amounts, so projecting to finish 2024 a little over 4 million, but note the EWP grant reimbursement of 1.7 million. So when we remove that to get it more to an operational basis, 2.3 million, mostly made up of sales tax of 2.25. If you look at the expenses, waste collection, taking it back down to historical amounts at 1.6 million. Salaries, as I mentioned, if you look at road and bridge, that number is higher compared to 2023 amounts. In solid waste, you can see it's lower than 2023 amounts. So that's where I'm coming from, that if you look at salaries in total, we're very much cost neutral from where we've historically been. So total revenue is 2.28 million, total expenses 2.315 million for a net deficit, operational deficit next year of 35,000 in solid waste. I would like to see that number zero or a small surplus, but when I look at the fact that whether something is a road and bridge cost or a solid waste cost, especially as it relates to personnel, some of it, how you allocate and who is doing what and where are they spending their time. Between the two of them, we're at a $35,000 surplus, so not a bad spot to be. The point there being, they're both covering themselves without supplements from the general fund. The dedicated taxes that they currently have are sufficient to fund their operations as it stands right now. Health unit, page 11. we've kind of hit on this already, but really there's nothing out of the ordinary here that is really worth noting. All of the revenues are in line with where they've historically been, primarily that ad valorem property tax that we've discussed and how the residual gets transferred. But you can see the spending just, it doesn't need the 1.1 million in property tax that it gets per year. It's spending anywhere from 320 to 350,000 a year, which is why it has that large surplus of 810. If you look historically, it didn't have quite that big of a surplus because it was the one making the 200,000 plus transfer to coroner. So if you look like at 23, a 696 surplus. This year, original budgeted surplus of 692, but that included a 216K transfer out to the coroner. So when you remove that, its surplus is where it's historically been, which is large. Now, what that does mean on an ongoing basis, if we get this true up taken care of, if it's going to run an $800,000 surplus a year, 720 into the road and bridge fund every year, 80 into the general fund every year. So that will help move forward, but it'd be a lot better if a larger share could go to general fund. Page 12, aesthetic jury, really nothing worth discussing there. You get money in to pay the compensation, you pay it back out, pretty much break even. Coroner fund is on page 13. Again, if you look historically, fees and fines come in around 50,000 a year. Expenses anywhere in the 265,000 to 310 ballpark. You can see what I've done for this year is it has historically, starting this year, it had fund balance of about 60,000. Knowing the shape the general fund was in, I just transferred enough in there through the amendment of 180,000 from the general fund to keep it a very minimal fund balance of 7,000. But as you move into next year, revenues of 50 and expenses of 310, that's a 260K delta. So that transfer from the general fund is simply to keep that fund balance from going negative. Again, one of those areas I would look at very closely moving forward. And criminal court, this is one of the areas I still need to work with your internal team and educate myself a little bit, because we've got a criminal court fund, but we've also got expenses that the general fund just pays for, not necessarily through a transfer to criminal court. So on the face of it, it looks pretty good in that, it does generate about 100,000 a year in revenue, and expenses are about 125,000. So it only needs about 10 to 15,000 a year from the general fund to kind of stay afloat and stay break even. But again, that's kind of one of those areas that we have not had time to dive into. I want to understand it more and say, well, what lives in this fund versus what are expenses of the criminal court that the general fund has just agreed to pay for? Because when you look at those two items in total, it would look that the general fund is supplementing it more than just 15,000 a year when you look at them in total.
Some of that may be unfunded mandates.
It could be, absolutely, and that's, I don't have a full understanding of the whole picture, right? It may be one of those things you look at it and you say, yeah, there's nothing else we can do. But I think, again, it's worth looking at like everything else. So again, to kind of recap, it's a status quo. It's to keep you in compliance from a spending standpoint with state budget law. The amendments are the best estimate we possibly have at this point of where you're going to ultimately finish 2024, and it allocates funds so you can begin operating in 2025. But as I mentioned in my email to Yamisha and David, when I kind of got this to a final point, I think we should really look at some of these things over the next 60 to 90 days, and my recommendation would be that we come back with a proposed budget amendment for 2025, sometime late Q1, early Q2 of 25. That you're not waiting to do it all at the end of the year and spending up to these levels for a full year. That you keep operating the way you've operated, but in the meantime, we kind of take the pencils back to the paper, and obviously any amendments that we bring you, it would be in an effort to get that general fund in a better spot long term.
But that's the budget we live with, we're working, that's what the president. We don't know, but right now we can deal with it, but.
Right, it's what this budget as it's laid out right now is what you've historically done in '23 and what you've done year to date in '24. Outside of the few changes I mentioned, right, reallocating salaries, but they're pretty much the same in total. And a few of the ARPA-related expenses. One of the things, and I have not gone back to look at the fund balance situation pre-COVID, but a lot of government agencies, whether it's parishes, municipalities, schools in particular, got very comfortable with a certain level of funding due to whether it was ARPA funds or various COVID money. And so I don't know how this fund balance number shakes out. I didn't go all the way back to your 19-20 time frame. But in all likelihood, the general fund surpluses you've seen the last 2 years, a lot of that is related to grant funds that you got and had not spent down.
So that's the budget year, schedule year. That's out, 2024, you're not going to put it.
So moved.
Okay. Yeah, Coach King, any discussion? Question from the audience? All in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, move on. Past President, what do you think?
Y'all wanna see me now?
Someone money now.
Y'all wanna see me? How y'all doing?
Take your name, please.
Walter King Sanders, Feliciana Parish. Okay, I've been here 7 years about some of the same issues. And I'm back again, some of the same issues. I've had, Mr. Oliver, when he was over the buildings, Mr. Flanagan, when he was over the buildings, had, Mr. Williams, he's been down to the parish prison to see. They even had Mr. Amron. He went down and did a tour of that person. And we got some real serious problems down there. But go back. The main thing I want to talk about, the first thing I want to talk about is the controls for the parish prison. The controls is what actually open and close all the doors. It's the brain, control center that runs the facility. I was here in November 25th of 2019. I was here and had a quote from RS to redo the system. It's the system that, an old system that has been in the parish prison for many years, and it's outdated. They can't do any more repairs on it. They actually put together a control for some old parts they had from the old system. It's just outdated. They go down now. It was go down right now. We've been in trouble. We got trouble getting the doors open out of the facility, actually running the facility. In 2019, I was here. The cost of that system was $62,905. All right. I came back again to the jury again in January of 24, January this year. And they gave me the updated quote because, as we know, the price, everything is constantly rising. The price had went from the $62,000, it had climbed to $78,080 to redo the system. Well, today I got another quote from them and what it would cost today. And by 11 months, it had gone from $78,000 to $86,716. to redo that system. I've got doors down there that isn't working. Mr. Kent used to be employed at the parish prison. We have one swing gate that separates the maximum security portion of the prison from the rest of the prison. That gate has been down for quite some time. We worked back and forth with RDS. I've had employees in DCI. They've come out to try to help us with it, and we haven't been able to get that particular gate back operational. So what in turn what had happened is it's been some guys that I wasn't comfortable with keeping there because of their jury had to pay for. We have one in Angola that's waiting to stand trial. I didn't feel comfortable keeping them there because of these issues. You should have some pictures and some quotes of some more doors that need to be replaced. And these quotes go back, some of them go back as far as 2020. I've been here several times and talked. I understand things are tight, money is tight. We got a new governor. He changed a lot of laws. He's got really tough on crime, and the sentencing guidelines is going to be a whole lot tougher. So you're going to have guys coming to prison that's going to have a whole lot more time. So guys know coming to jail now, they are faced with a whole lot more than what they had in the past. The second thing I want to bring to your attention is air conditioning issue, the start issue, the HVAC issue. I came to the jury, talking to the parish manager, we've been here before with the HVAC issue. It went down. We went through the summer, so what we ended up going by portable ACs to put in one particular portion of the facility, J-Wing. The only way to repair this, they have to cut the roof and take the units out that went bad. Because when the facility was built, the units was put there and the roof was built over the top of it. Horrible design. But the only way to repair it is to cut the roof, get a crane, take the unit out, and put the unit back. That's the only way to do it. We went through the summer, this summer, in those particular dorms, it was average heat of the temp was average around 90 degrees. That's with the little portable AC running. We have worked diligently to save the jury money. Sheriff's office have really worked hard to save the jury money. We've been good stewards of the jury money. You know, we understand we live somewhat of a poor parish. We don't have the tax base a lot of parishes have. So we have always watched our spending very close. Sheriff and I, every month, we go over everything. We watch the spending real close. I've seen some improvements in the parish. For example, the parking lot out there looks real nice. Washington Street looks real nice. What I don't want is for the parish prison, because it still is owned by the jury. I don't want us to get lost in the movement.
So you won't become prison for all 6 years. We're not going to put your will from it.
Because it's getting to the point now I'm concerned about public safety, and God knows I do not want anybody to get out of that prison because of some of these issues that I've been bringing here since 2019.
The prison built in 1980,
Can we use any ARPA money to solve the problem? I mean, we have ARPA money, we might have other things that we want to use it for, but any way we can use it for the building, the jail, we can't use it for more.
we would spend quite a bit. I mean, it's nothing on the phone. But it's cheap for us to
How
do.
much money do we have? We had enough to buy 10 pickup trucks a little while ago.
Did you all approve buying?
No, we did not.
No, you didn't.
I'm not trying to be hard or anything, it's just that, I look at the agenda, I look at the money that's spent to do other things, and I just don't wanna get lost in that shuffle, because I'm telling you, I've lost a lot of sleep worrying about things happening. The electric just went down, when Energy did the control power outage. Y'all know the money y'all spent on the generators, y'all know the problem we had with the generators, we lost the generator. That particular night, we had problems opening one of the doors, we couldn't get, we had to disassemble the whole door. Just thank God I had a maintenance guy down there that was pretty savvy and was able to help us get that door open. We've had some problems when those units go down. I'm just coming back, I keep coming back. I just pray and hope nothing happens.
But it's a public safety.
That's the main thing.
And that's somewhere we have to make some tough calls.
Take under consideration when you're doing your general fund, because we talked about some of the overlays and stuff, but that's road and bridge. So when you have to take care of things that have to be done at this jail, that's your prison, that's your general fund as well.
So again, back to like, Quinn, he said, what about the art ones? We have,
I'm with that in there.
We'll Mr. Allen look into that,
Yeah, 'cause we
and
need
see
to-
if we got anything in there that we could spare and try to help them out with some of
What do
it.
you
We might not be
do?
able to do everything, we
No.
get something to do.
No, yeah, I understand that, I don't expect y'all to just take care of everything, I just know I've seen some things going forward, and look, down there, DA do a good job, got Detective Garrett, they do a real good job of controlling crime here, putting those guys there, we got a hold them there, and, I just would hate, we saw right across from Tangible Hole. You see these guys getting out of these facilities all the time. I just thank God that we haven't been on the news with any of that, and that's where I wanna keep it. I wanna keep the people in this parish safe.
So
That's why I'm here.
So what I'm saying is, I know you mentioned 2019, so you've been after this, trying to get some things done for that.
Since 2019.
I think we should really try to work like, Mr. McCray said, give Ms. Caroline, man, we need to move forward on it. Because I was, like you said, you hate to say it, but if anybody get out, the first thing gonna be doing, what do y'all guys doing, how do you get out? And the first thing we come back, well, we put y'all since 2019, about getting doors fixed, that's how we got to do regular doors. So, as a board member, I think we should try to work at least.
Are these the only bids we are about from these two places?
Ma'am?
Can we get more bids from just these two places, they are cheaper than Mississippi?
Yeah, it's just, these particular bids, that company is one of the few that even work on prison stuff. Like,
I should have maybe you could find a, very cheaper company.
yeah, I got another company that's doing, that come and look at everything, and they're the company that do DCI, but I know they're not gonna come in cheap, and we talk to the guys, they're not gonna come in cheap and all that. Trust me, all that is out, it's gonna be the best shot.
So before you sit down, I know you're gonna move on here, but if you had to choose, what would be your first option?
First part.
Your first part, is it either doors or?
Controls, the door.
Okay, so we need to work, so as a girl, I think we need to work for us, like Mr. McCray said, on those controls. And I hope that Ms. Caroline get back, you know, the dragons on another 5 years, you know.
We use the other money, I don't know how much they have for anything, when you probably use some of it, really, all the things on the plan.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, what, thank you for that. You are going to work with you, like when you leave behind. Okay, let's go on the next one. Discuss, take action on Act 179, and deal with homestead exemption for full-time employees that are,
Want me to give you a little explanation of this?
Take your name, please.
Sam Clark, District Attorney. So, as most of you know, in 2003, the legislature voted to create a constitutional amendment for first responders. They passed that, it was submitted to the voters because constitutional amendments have to be voted on by the voters. So they passed the constitutional amendment in November of 2023. It went into effect January of 2024, and it has It's an amendment that increases the homestead exemption from 75,000 to 100,000 for first responders. First responders are outlined as police officers, firefighters. They have some requirements to be a first responder for a firefighter and a police officer, and it's outlined in the constitutional amendment to that. The police jury or the governing authority has to approve that to take effect. And to take effect in 2025, it needs to be approved by the jury. So that's kind of why it's presented to y'all tonight. I'm just standing up here before you on behalf of the first responders and the firefighters and asking you to consider adopting that. It's going to be, like I said, it's going to be an additional 25,000 on the homestead exemption. So the first responders or the firefighters, our office does not qualify. But for the first responders and the firefighters, they have to own the home and they have to have a current homestead exemption. So it's not going to apply to everybody across the board who is a first responder, only those who qualify for a homestead exemption. Now, the 25,000, if you have 10 people that qualify, additional tax revenue would be about $125 per $25,000 exemption. So you're not really losing that much money when you add the lower taxes. It's just going to be an additional tax break for the first responders and the firefighters.
Doesn't count for volunteers, right? It's just paid.
It counts for volunteers if they have 24 hours of CLE and they're a member of the Louisiana State Fire Association or volunteer firefighters insurance program.
So they have to be vested in.
Correct. And Mr. Gardner is going to have to adopt a policy to submit to them. They're going to have to request this homestead exemption annually. So they're going to have to take the form, they're going to have to fill it out, they're going to have to submit it to this form and yearly qualify for taxes. Homestead exemption. You had some firefighters that were here tonight. Unfortunately, they got called out. I think they may have wanted to talk. Mr. Garrett's here. I don't know how they feel free. I don't know how they feel about it.
I make a motion.
And Mr. Sanders and Mr. Matthews. I don't know if they want to say anything about it.
Believe me, we were to put our firefighting and first responders 100%. We got a motion by Mr. Chesky. That's about our opportunity.
Can we get together and see what the next steps are? Is there something we need to?
No, that's all y'all have to do is approve it. Mr. Gardner's going to have to develop some forms for
Just to let
everybody.
you know that it's
Bring up to, you respond. You respond to
we knew that it would be on the.
So we got motion stuff, and it's just on the order. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, approve advertising for standby contract to Stone Greenwood. And as you know, we got that procedure in place for the hurricane season.
Motion.
We're gonna put that. Put the order, on the table. Approve advertising for standby contract for the Greek money.
Motion.
Mr. Neal. Any discussion?
We just wanted to get these in place now, they expire in March.
Right.
So we'll have time to start the advertising.
Representative for her. Let's take that from Robert down to business, so, what we do here.
If y'all remember, 2 weeks ago, we asked you all to,
It's back up, we got one to second, all in favor? And opposed, motion carried. Okay, Mr. President.
this was what we had asked you all 2 weeks back, until you was put on the agenda. Will Andrews and I got together, and these vehicles across these vehicles not work with paying insurance. So his recommendation was to drop the physical damage and go strictly liability. And if you see, they're the ones that have to small out beside.
This is the new
That's it.
Yeah, you see, like I say, it's one with the star, or the numbers kind of messed up too. It's 13 of them. And like I say, I'm not even sure all these still running anyway. We're gonna look again and see.
This is our business,
I'd like to make that motion.
We're gonna look at
Just
this.
liability.
Is that?
One second.
That's Mr. Chastain. Any discussion? Question on it? Is all in favor? And opposed, motion carries. Next on the agenda is discuss take action of HGA. Okay. You put that on the agenda? Yes, ma'am. Okay.
I did. I know that we have a plan to use our local, people in the office to do our work that we have contracted with HGA to use, and they can do pretty quickly and pretty rapidly, and I've gotten some information that perhaps our people are a little overwhelmed, and it's taken a while, to get some things done, and I would like to discuss a little bit about do we want to use the company that we voted on to do this. They've helped us a good bit in the past, and, I think perhaps they know more than we do, because this is their area that they work in. And Mr. Wendell, can you come answer any questions?
Well, let me say something first. I don't know where you're getting your information from. We're not overwhelmed. We are finished with Francine. We're waiting on one thing for Francine. So no, you know, HGA can come in handy on the bigger storms, but on the small storms, that y'all will get 100% reimbursed for. Could be 75, 25, or 90, 10. I don't know why you want to pay somebody to have somebody take it for yourself. I mean, that's up to you all. And we have everything in place now. And HCA Wonderland's help, Jesse's help, you know, to get us to the point where the more we can do, I believe the better off you are, because you save money. And if you look at your budget, you better start trying to figure out how to save money.
Good evening, everybody. Wendell Piper, HGA. It's been a pleasure working with a lot of the staff here. Misha, Mr. David, Caitlin Frost is my main man. So most of the times, I'll say, when the event happens, when a storm happens, and it's federally declared, FEMA comes in, and there is a cost share, but also associated with that is what's known as a CAT-Z PW. And what that does is allows the parish to be reimbursed costs that you would incur from hiring a consultant. So usually all of our costs are paid for by this CAT-Z PW. So right now, East Feliciana has 3 open disasters that have the 2016 flood, Hurricane Ida, and they have Hurricane Delta first and Ida. But then this year, we had some storms come through in April and May, and the state picked up, a portion of that cost is 75-25. And I think the parish has incurred costs from us that will not be reimbursed for about $4,000. Now, we have applied for over $400,000, so that's about 1% for our costs. And we're trying to keep that low, and we have submitted all paperwork, all documentation to date. I think Caitlin sent someone on our staff, Ms. Jessie Sumter, one more invoice. So I think, we can definitely look at, not even billing for that. A lot of times, I don't bill for that. We're neighbors. I live in East Baton Rouge, so. But that's generally what we do. So I think this instance where we're talking about April and May events that were not federally declared, there was not a CAT-Z PW put in place. But typically that is not the case, and all of our costs are paid for by FEMA.
So let me ask a question. You mean by our cost? What would you say, how many percent, like our cost, 70, 20?
So typically there's a cost share with an event, with a storm.
So my question is, if we think we share that cost, but we don't really share that cost, that's a reimbursed cost, is what you're saying?
That's right. To hire HGA to come in and do all of your grants, all of your paperwork, everything to get funding, the federal government pays you back. So you pay us, and then we apply to get reimbursed. That's correct. That's correct. And typically, we stay under 5%.
But as he just said, it's not always, it's just, there again, I don't mind using that shed, I never said they won't use them, I don't know where that came from either, but it's the fact of the matter, we can do it in-house and save money. And did you find out about the two invoices that are identical?
Yeah, but they're.
They're identical.
They are identical.
Or two different stores?
For two different stores. And that totals up to $23.85. And that's a portion of that $4,000 that I was talking about. And the backup for it is, again, for one of my personnel who works for me, Ms. Jessie Sumter, I'm a project manager, and I know y'all are all familiar with my boss who's really pushing. But everything on these two invoices that Ms. Amor is talking about is for Jessie Sumter, who works under me, who's a grant specialist, and those costs do look pretty reasonable for the amount of time that she put in. They are identical, $1,192.52. And that's spread across both the April severe storm event and the May storm event.
My question was,
$4,000.
Yes, that's what we've, roughly, and I can find out, and I know they can find out too, the exact for the April and May events.
my only concern with these two invoices here, well, they are identical for the April storm and the May storm. I mean, the dates are something.
So typically and I'll speak to that, typically, and Jesse's not here, but we got to push, probably right before Thanksgiving. I got a call from someone at GOSEP who manages these things, and David and Daryl and Caitlin, I think you too, Mr. Ken, or maybe on the emails. But they said they really wanted to get, a lot of this funding out of the door before the holidays, even before Thanksgiving. And we came up here maybe sometime in October, November, the state did, myself, and we had a window of, maybe 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, and at the end of October, early November, to really get the funding out. And that's what the governor wanted to do, and that's what the director of GOSEP wanted to do, is get the funding to the parishes before the end of the year. So these invoices cover the period between October the 28th and November the 24th of this year. And I think that's why, again, the dates correlate, because she was not only working the April event, she was also working the May event simultaneously, so.
What about the amounts? I guess that would be my question. I guess that's what Mr. David is driving at. So it's not a true representation of time in that case for whatever aspect is a standardized amount that's billed for? I mean, can you clarify the actual billing, itemized billing on those statements? Because I looked at them before the meeting and was kind of curious myself.
Yeah, so again, they are identical in the amounts. The days cover, if I'm looking at, and I'll start with the first invoice, 53964 is for the April storm event, and then the next invoice is for the May event. So looking at it, there was a total charge. I got you. Yeah, so, all right, to his point, to Mr. Davis' point, the comments are identical. And typically, that's kind of what we do. It's standard, and they do differ a little bit, but we go into it, and if Jessie is working on contract labor, if she's looking at things that the debris monitor did, or she's making or creating contract work summary sheets, some of that stuff can be redundant day to day, totaling up the cost, looking at invoice, and using those generalized comments. But the hours tied to them, for November 1st, I think she worked half an hour, 0.5 hours. The next day, 4.25 hours. And that's pretty standard on how they bill. So 15 minutes, 1 hour the next day, 3 hours, 1 hour, a half an hour. So again, it wasn't a big task, but it was, did require some work. So I don't think that it was a case of overbilling here. So I mean, the comments are pretty standard, pretty regularly, and but the hours are in line with what I see. Half an hour here, 0.251, 3.
So are you saying that she was up here working on 2 storms at the same time and doing some of the same things?
Yeah, the exact same. I mean, they're both debris removal storms. The April, May, trees down, series came through, picked up a lot of the debris. So it's the same things.
So she was working on the same things at the same time?
But
So
two
there's
different
two
events.
storms?
Yeah.
So that's why.
And the only difference in between that is the days the event happened. One happened in April, one happened in May.
And they were trying to get it all together before the New Year.
That's it.
Holiday,
That's
so
it.
that's why
There was a big push.
she's owed the money.
I don't think it's no secret, no reflection on this man, that I haven't been a large fan of HDA when I come on board. Y'all had already started. I don't know when their contract's up, I think it's time to look. It's just like the garbage business, we need to look. And I'm not so much concerned about this invoice, is that I know that it's a lot of things out there that we're missing, of grants and so forth. Now, one time, you might can tell us what year it was, 2 or 3 years ago, we had a show and tell. It looked really well. 30, how many million was it, 30 million or whatever? I don't know exactly how many millions come true. But we have a show and tell, it makes you feel good. When it feels good, we just talk about the bank. When it goes in the bank, when you got, just say Mr. Frosty got a new truck, if they got grants, we need a piece of equipment, we need this. I mean, I know that there's people, there's parishes, government that's getting it, and I don't think we're getting what we should be getting. So that's my comment. It's nothing against this man here, but we can hear. It's kind of like these guys that worked in the plants, ISO 9000, we just keep going round and round and round. So it ain't making me feel good because we couldn't tell Kenny Sanders we could give him $400,000 to fix the jail, or we didn't get to pave all the roads. So anyway, thank you for your time.
I was always a thing with getting a grant writer for it, for the repair, 88 is what I grant writer responsibility. What we did was you were thinking on the catering bill, grant writer, across the rest of the repair, the rest of the time.
Yeah. I mean, I brought up one time, I thought I was cuckoo, that it's people at the Capitol that watches this stuff all the time.
Yes,
All I tell you.
I
I mean, do it for $100, $200 a month, very minimal, and then you gotta have somebody follow up on it. And I'm not saying they're not doing it, but I'm just saying that I know that it's there, I know fruit is being bared, but it ain't being bared here. Thank you.
I agree with you, because you got some local folks who say got money, no matter.
Yep.
If I can say one more thing, and to Mr. Richards' point, I totally understand where you're coming from. That is not something that we do. So I think, for East Feliciana Parish, you would be doing a good job to find, grant writers or grant opportunity out there, such as, y'all said ARPA a lot, and we do ARPA, and we have somebody working with Unisha, I think, on ARPA, at Bricky. And there are tons of grants out there. But what we do is specific to disasters and disaster related. And I know we're one of the best in the business at doing that. So.
Well, thank you, you explained yourself a little bit.
Yes,
It
sir.
would be the parish that hired grant writer.
Right, because I know HDA, is this storm business, aren't they big in the petrochem, or the oil, the gas, or something like that? where they're really big at? And then
Yeah, we do have other divisions at HGA. We are an engineering company, pipeline service company
Right.
that started in Ruston and here we're under Jack Hunt, who, you know, second generation owner and vice president and park principal. So we do a lot of engineering services, a lot of disaster recovery services as well. So.
This is company, not a grant bank.
Hey, now
We
we're
should
talking about we all get on the same page.
Yeah.
Let's figure this out.
We asking too much for,
Because we, you know, if we get something this year, it'd be the year after before it varies.
for the last, I said, who cares to hire grant bank? The beneficiary to hear it. I don't think any company should be a grant writer for the cash. We should hire our own grant writer, legal project.
That's not a reflection on what HGA.
No, never, no, still don't never help.
I'm not in favor of getting rid of HGA, because I know they've gotten millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah, and again, I'm not gonna sit here and lie to you and tell you that these costs are covered, but generally, the costs to pay us are covered and reimbursable to you guys. And this time it's not, and this time that total is about $4,000.
1%.
So it's not like, yeah, it's gonna cost us $25,000 like it's made out, yeah.
So
It's reimbursed.
to manage the Ida storm, FEMA approved, I wanna say $75,000 for us to come in, get the bridges obligated, the funds rolling, things like that. So, and we're under budget on all of those storms that I named, the 2016 flood, Hurricane Delta, and Hurricane Ida. And they typically, FEMA pays for us our costs that you incur.
We didn't pay the 75, FEMA paid the 75.
That's correct, that's correct.
Well, if we think about this a little bit, you've got Caitlin, who is being talked about being a grant writer.
She's not around.
Something that's important should be handled by people who know what they're doing. She can try to get the little grants that are here and there, but something that's important and that much money, I think that we should do it every day.
Well, and that's what I'm saying, if she's got her hands in a lot of things, and maybe there's some things she needs to specialize in, maybe grant writing, and this is their specialty.
They are managing storms, but they're not hustling us money.
They're not grant writers.
No.
If we need to hustle money,
That's what I'm saying, maybe
That's not their business.
No,
I'm not
that's
saying
right.
that.
Yeah.
I'm saying, perhaps Caitlin can help us with the grant writing and lead people who do.
It's not a grant
well, she ain't, let's find one, and get her educated.
I just tell you that word.
I mean, we've done that, we've done it with Mr. Williams, we got him educated.
And HGA is an expert, HGA is an expert in the disaster management, in their field. Let's let them do their job, let our people get back to doing things that maybe they can do quicker and better than what they're doing right now. Not that they're doing bad.
Yeah,
but
I
this
work
is
with
taking their
Caitlin,
time.
responsive, she, you know, things that we ask her for,
But she's learning.
she's, so,
She's
yeah.
new, she's
Yeah,
learning.
she is, all right.
You still might have to have someone in place in the office, because when you talk about 2016 flood and Delta and Ida,
But
none of those people are here from those floods, so you know, it took some time before to try to find all of these invoices and different things to work with HGA.
What do we still have left to do on this, on these two storms, do y'all know? What we still got left? We still working on
April
that?
and May?
With these last storms?
It's not, I call it not.
Yeah, but I mean, smaller, what? Smaller.
Gary Hill, Director of Public Works. Everything else has been turned in except for Frank. I mean, we got everything done but the cost share for the equipment. But when we met with the lady the other day, it's a lot of questions that we don't know because we've never been asked before and we never had to do. And see, that's one of the problems we're facing now, because when we go out to clear roads, we don't have time to write the hours of the machine in pitch black before we even get to work.
So in retrospect, that's something HTA would normally take care of.
Right.
Yeah.
So you guys shouldn't have to be doing it.
Yeah, yeah. You should help
just working on the Francine that we got to add in for next month.
All right. Thank you, appreciate it.
All right, thank y'all.
Anything else?
No, but, so are we gonna make a motion that we're gonna use them as our people to actually do this, or? we just need to- So it'll be different than what it's doing right now?
Just let them do it.
But we got it on the table, we know we need somebody to start looking at grants.
But no, not only in the house,
Well, I'm just, look, I tried to bring somebody in here a couple of years ago, and I got shot down, got them taken off the agenda, you know? So, I mean, this ain't my first shot at this.
you talked about a lot of before, I'm talking about the grant.
It's somebody that did it all and specialized at that.
Okay, well, that's what taken. Everybody try to find kids.
So are we gonna ask HGA to come back and work on Francine?
Now, we're talking about two milestones, the one that you can make.
We're talking about Francine, that's what Frosty said. They're not doing Francine. They're not doing Francine. Should they?
We're talking about two milestones, that's what we're doing. That's what we're talking about, right?
But right now, you're getting information from
I get
Francine.
the information, I turn it into cake, that's my job.
But you're getting it on Francine
Yes, ma'am.
now. So we are.
Oh,
Francine.
but
y'all-
Sure.
HGA
That's already.
is not doing Francine.
Who's going to Francine?
We have not started on Francine yet. Francine is of course the most recent disaster.
Come back over here. Okay, so what do we need to do for HGA to start on Francine?
So,
Like, why didn't y'all do it anyway? Like, why is this even a question?
Where's Dave at?
That's the thing.
yeah, so typically what we do is we just initiate a task order on it. And, we worked with Daryl in the past to, come up with numbers, to come up to see if, thresholds for the parish were met and, to get the ball rolling. But certainly that's something we can do and we would love to do for you. And I know you're
I'm curious why-
Dennis, that the Francine tomorrow. So tomorrow, I think at what time, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, she'll be here. And she's worked with the parish before and she's coming up, tomorrow to take a look at that information there. So I'll make sure that we get a task order in place and have a Francine as well. And she'll bring it tomorrow. So there you go.
I guess my question is like, why didn't y'all do, like, were you told not to do it?
Yeah, no.
So you need to contact y'all from this form and tell y'all, hey, come do this?
Well, I know it's been a lot of discussion again, and they just love to have those smaller events in-house and things like that. And,
I don't think that's something that should be done without us discussing. Anything HGA related, storm related,
It's a jury issue, not
right.
anybody else.
If she wants to write a grant to get
I agree with you.
whatever else, she can do that, but don't mess up what y'all do.
all right, thank you.
That's my opinion.
And we will be here tomorrow. We will.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And Mr. Cross, that would be putting it on your plate if you're doing all that, correct?
Yes, sir. I got bridges fixing this month.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Hey, did y'all charge us to come tonight?
No, it's me.
But they move on.
Yeah.
Quote from them said, LLC, but I don't know, asked for $22,915. And you know.
Yes, sir, they, Mr. Frosty, you could probably tell us a little bit more, I think y'all documented it, but basically an 18-wheeler went down our freshly overlaid road in my district, realized it was the wrong address at a dead end, couldn't turn around, attempted to do so, and then the landing gear from the trailer it was pulling dug into the blacktop and and turned it up on the shoulder, on the left, what would be the left-hand portion if you're.
Director of Public Works.
And Mr. Perry can tell you the rest.
Yes, sir, that's correct. He got stuck, horizontal of the road. So two residents' property, called the record service fast stop from Zachary. They attempted to, get him unstuck. He stuck the outrigger in the first week, poured asphalt, broke the road.
Just for the record, again, who was it that went down the road? It was.
The jury.
It was a C&K truck. He was hauling material for Pac-Tech.
So this is a quote for us to be?
Well, right before David, right before David left, he told me that he would get with Sam to go after the 18.
That was gonna be what I said, we probably need to go after their insurance and get it addressed.
But I guess.
Did you file a report or anything?
Well, we did the report, we turned it all in to the main office. I mean, we did ours, we documented it, we took pictures, we got a written statement from the driver.
And from what I understand, the police, the sheriff's office cited the driver?
Yes,
Is that
sir.
what you understood as well?
Yes, sir. We also had the police report.
I think we need to send that quote to the people.
That would be it right there.
Is that possible?
Yeah. I'll get the quote, make an insurance claim with their insurance.
I understand that the company paid the lady whose driveway was all torn up. So then they should
That
pay
I
for our road.
don't know. I was just documenting.
Well, we got to take care of that, Sam.
Thank you, Mr. Frosty, thank you, Mr. Quiller.
Not that over right now.
Let's move on. Take action on 2024 liquor license approval, small town driving.
So I do have a question. She did just, I'm sorry, so everything was turned in for 2024 because she was thinking maybe she got everything in, she can open, for the holidays. Will she be required to pay 2025? She has no problem if she does, but she just
I
wanted
wouldn't
to.
think so. I might be wrong.
Well, was she buying a full-scale liquor license, or just beer, or what we get? Whatever the sheriff tells us, it would be the same thing what we do.
Once the state passes, we can't supersede the state anyway.
But states vote, they vote a year.
Yeah, we can't do that.
Here, and the sheriff.
If
votes-
you get a permit for the
So
sale.
if you open, I mean, I've been through all this, and I never got cut no slack. If, if it's within this year, you paid it this year, and next year, it's boom, so whatever.
You think it's a one day?
Whatever the sheriff says.
One day, 24 days, we would, 20 days. Right. Okay. Let's,
Do you need a motion to approve it?
We already got, what was it?
just have vote now. Is all in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? Who got the time to fill vacancy on jail, number 2?
So moved.
For advertising. Question for order. All in favor? All in favor? And opposed? Motion carries. Training Zone Commission meeting, January 10th. We approve. And it was the last Tuesday of each month.
Except for December next year, just like it always, it's the middle, the second Tuesday, so we can meet y'all third Tuesday or third Monday.
Motion?
Motion approved.
All in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? Motion carries. Committee staff report. Within committee recommendations shall amend public, paid holidays to include actual hours worked. Mr. President.
Yes, what we amended was, we took out the verbiage that says regular pay rate and added in, compensated at holiday pay, and then it's regular pay rate, that addition, and the actual, the word actual is the addition, hours worked And in the addition, begin again and say, shall be compensated at 1.5 times the normal rate if the employee has physically worked 40 hours.
Give me a receipt time and a half.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
You can't take sick leave, you can't try to make $40. Yeah, actually work those
That's
40
right.
hours.
Okay.
Motion
Motion.
for Mr. Flynn.
Second.
Second by Host Gill. Any discussion? Question or order? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Question committee,
Now, Mr. Kent, I don't have any.
funds committee. Again, Mr. President.
Yes, sir. I'd like to make a motion to approve monthly invoices.
Any discussion? Question or order? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Public Works and Equipment, Mr. David Craig.
I don't have Mr. President.
Building Traffic, Mr. Richard Allen.
I don't have anything other than Kenny was just in here, and and Mr. Homestead's on board, it's been the same every time they come, we don't have the money. That anybody in here can go out to the jail and see that it's in disrepair, it needs a lot of work, you know? So I think, excuse me, I think that we got to get together and come up with how much money that we can let them have at one time. And with the budget, it's $550,000 to $500,000. You know, every quarter, start letting him have some money, because he's gonna get it anyway. And then the third quarter, if we done used up all of that, then we gotta look at ways to figure the money out, because it's not going away. I promise you it's not going away. Whether we up here or who's here, it's not going away. And so we might as well sit down and figure out how we can, you know, do it just like you do personal financing. We don't do it every quarter, or every month, or whatever, and say this is, it's just like the budget. You got this much money to spend, boom, 90 days you'll have this much more money to spend, and just go ahead and bite the bullet and get it out of the way. And that's all I got.
We ain't spending all the money, I don't know how much left. We don't get.
Can't be much, because we sure don't spend a lot.
No.
Yeah.
I like that.
Who's spending now?
Thank you, Martin.
Anything else? Treasury report? Comment, please, Gary, have to do. General comment? Thank you, Tony. Public comment. What's your name, please?
John Lucian on public comment. Tonight we talked about that opioid money, and talked about not having an administrator. The opioid money is just like any other grant that comes through here. We have an administrator. It's called the treasurer. Can we disperse the invoices that are pending? Because it's about to roll over a year, and you're about to get another invoice from the coroner's office, because part of that whole thing that the Attorney General set up is you get reimbursed for opioid expenses for deaths.
Well, what I would say, I wasn't at the last meeting, this came up before David came, and at one time when Matt Ricky was working with us from HGA. So from what I was told then, the opioid money had to be used to prevent, or for opioid usage, when you have someone to die from that, that's not anything that we're using to prevent. So if someone has problem with the addiction, you have counseling, anything, Sam's not here, and I think he even discussed that too. If someone goes to jail and you want them to go through some kind of intervention thing, that's what I was told for now. I don't know if David has looked at it anymore, but body bags or anything like that, someone's died from opioid, then that's not.
They don't see about body there. You don't see about body there.
No, that's not a prevention.
It talks about law enforcement and any expenses done with an opioid overdose
That's jail.
is in there. We're considered law enforcement because that's who the law calls when there's a death and you go out and you have to draw blood and everything because you have to confirm what it is. So you have the toxicology. It's a way, and the abatement agreement is very vague, but it specifically talks about law enforcement and any expenses occurred with the opioid overdose
Wouldn't that be
is
like
reimbursable.
Narcan and stuff like that?
Opioid overdose, if you can, show that, but from what he just said, from me hearing it, anything with the opioid overdose, not death. You may have where you buy Narcan and different things like that.
Narcan and things like that is big with that would cover.
Yeah, but he's not, that's not what he's asking for.
How can body that
Prevent. Well, I've asked before, and that's what I got. So unless,
And 3 or 4 months
David, or
ago,
you know who, you
I've
can,
already called the Attorney General and they said
well, can
it's
you,
just
can
a
you show us
minute.
that?
You have the opioid abatement agreement, and there's a specific thing in there, which I turned in with the invoice. It says, law enforcement and any expenses associated with an opioid overdose. When law enforcement gets called, it's not an ambulance and 5 batches of Narcan. The sheriff gets a different fund that pays for the Narcan. It's still in the abatement money, but he gets his own money. That's one reason he wasn't gonna take over whatever the parish gets, because he gets a separate fund for that. The reason, and there's no other use being used right now. The Attorney General says it's a local administration. 3 months ago, I was told it was gonna be turned over to Falk and Winkler so they can look at it. I don't care who looks at it, but give me a definitive answer and don't stick a sticky on the invoice and shove it under my door and says it's not funded.
You have it writing that, how it,
I got the same opioid abatement agreement MOU that everybody got. I went online and printed it out and gave them the page that applied. Didn't have to read 47 pages, he only had to read the
What do
one.
your invoice include, Mr. Richard?
It includes anything associated with an opioid death.
That means bags and everything, right?
Bag. If you've got to send it out for an autopsy, if you happen to be a prisoner and it goes for autopsy, because that's what happens at the prison, they want something to cover it. You got $1,500 worth of toxicology you got to run.
I suppose it's not,
And all it is taking part of this money that the state has allotted to the parish and moving it over. It's not costing you anything, it's just sitting in an account right now. Nobody will take any action, it's sitting there. The reason council on it, or the drug people gave it back, was because part of their program, and they talked about it up here, was cannabis. Cannabis is not an opioid. I'm just asking, make please, find somebody.
I never saw that. What he's saying about cannabis, no, they were going to do counseling and different things like that. I don't.
We need to just clarify this. We're spending too much time on the issue. We need to clarify and move on.
We need money for the water response.
what we say, want to have, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Get what you're doing. All this stuff.
Everybody.
Yeah.